All right. I want to make sure that this is actually live here. While we are waiting a couple minutes, I would love to see where you guys are all from, whoever is on. Yep, of course, it only will let my friends see this, so I'm changing it up. In your face, Facebook. Okay, we got somebody watching. My name is Dr. Sharnael Wolverton-Sehon. I am with swiftfire.org True TV, and I am absolutely delighted to have an old friend, a new friend, an old friend, but I haven't seen him in a while, friend. Yep. Paul Young, who is the author of The Shack and many other books since then, by the way. This is my personal signed copy from what I was thinking this morning. How long has it been since I've physically seen you? It's been probably like 10 years.
10 years. Yep.
10 years. It's been, how does time go by like that? But thank you for being here with me today and with all of us.
Honored to be with you. Always good to hear your voice.
I know. You know, I text every now just to check in with you. And yep. one thing that I love about this man is he is forever present. He is literally love on legs. And he has taught me so much, not just through the book and the books and the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, definitely get that perspective as well. But anytime I text and anytime I've actually seen his interaction with other people, he is like locked in and connected with source and being love to whoever is physically in front of him. And I just really appreciate that. It's made me become more aware of how I am present and or not present with others as well. But so
took a long time to get there, let me tell you.
Really?
Oh, it's a journey. You start as a child being present, but then you're quickly invited into leaving the presence in order to try to future trip some accomplishment or some way to deal with fear. And then it takes a long time to learn and trust that presence is what we're designed for.
Well, it's really good for the immunity. I can tell you that.
Well, we're designed for it, so that would make total sense.
Yeah, since I've actually physically seen you, I went and got my doctorate, and so
I've been that.
Practicing.
And I followed you, so I knew you got it.
Yes. So, for those who don't know anything about you, which I doubt, but he was only a bestseller for like a million years. I would love for you to share your backstory for anyone who may be new to you.
Okay.
And I mean, some of us may hear this again. Some of you have heard this, but I would love to hear it again, and I would love for anyone else to hear it.
Bird's eye view. Born Canadian up in northern Alberta. I was a year old when my parents and I moved to the highlands of what was then Netherlands New Guinea. A Dutch colony, the big island right above Australia, half of which was an Australian colony called Papua New Guinea, which is given its independence before we got there. And the other half was just indigenous tribal people and under Dutch control, in the sense that the Dutch kind of managed the coastline. But my parents were missionaries, modern Western evangelical holiness movement missionaries. And my dad had grown up as a hunter-trapper, so he was set for pioneer missions. We moved in, I was a year old, we moved into what was nicknamed Cannibal Valley because they did practice ritualistic cannibalism. And but they were a agrarian, large tribe, like 20 to 40,000 members over 100 square miles. And New Guinea is very unusual. It has over 800 unrelated language groups, like no connection between the language groups. And I think they're still looking for the Tower of Babel somewhere in the middle of New Guinea. But so I grew up there, experienced some of the profound things of being a third culture kid, growing up in a multicultural world, and the joys of that, and then some of the tragedy of being a third culture kid, especially in missions at that time, children were sort of the sacrificial lambs because there was a bigger mission at stake. And so, my father he didn't have a chip for being a dad. His father had destroyed that before I ever showed up, and his father before him. So I didn't have that connection at all. I was raised tribal. In fact, I didn't even know I was white till I was sent to boarding school when I was 6. And it was a huge disappointment. So missionary kid, then we came back to Canada when I was about 10. My dad was an itinerant preacher, went to 13 schools before I graduated high school. So every hello was a goodbye waiting to happen. And some of my great sadness, besides my dad and just the issues with trying to figure out where you belong, was the sexual abuse that happened both in the tribal context, but then also in missionary boarding school. And my addiction became performance, to try to mask over my deep sense of shame. And that's where the imagery of the shack comes from. It's the house on the inside that people help you build. And sadly, a lot of us, we didn't get good help. And so it's not a real habitable place. It becomes the shack, and that's where you store your addictions and hide your secrets. And it's held together by fear and shame and lies. And you're not trying to be a fake. You just have such a low view of yourself. You're just trying to cover it up because you can't deal with any more disappointment in terms of what you see in the face of other people. It's just the mirror back to you it's too devastating. And so I became a performance addict. I did well at everything, although I thought I was just fooling people. And I built a facade. If you'd have known me in my teens and 20s and stuff, you'd have said, he's a good guy. Something's a little off about him, but he's a good guy. And I held it together. I was always a hard worker. My dad instilled that. And so if you're a hard worker, there's no competition. I mean, it's just kind of the way that it happens. And so I was, quote, successful at different things that I did. Got my undergraduate degree, did some seminary work, had a desperate desire to know who God was, and a tradition that made God dangerous. So my religious tradition, and yet surrounded by beauty. Beauty had a way of dismantling my survival mechanisms, and thankfully I got married to the person that I did. Kim is a force to reckon with, born in Minot, North Dakota, where there's no 50 shades of nothing. And her and her 5 sisters, she has 5 sisters and 2 brothers, but her and her 5 sisters are called the Force. No. And may the Force be with you, yes. And I married her not because I knew how to love anybody, because I didn't. But I really thought that God had said, you need to marry Kim. And the sad part of that is that she paid a huge price for that. And that's, well into our marriage. We have our 6th child, Matthew, who is now 27. He had just been born. And Kim caught me in a 3-month affair with one of her best friends. And that blew up the world. And I had to make a decision whether to, out of my desperation, find a way to change or just kill myself. Because suicide had always been a companion, the last way to run away before having to face yourself. And I decided to do the hard work, which was to face Kim. We never made my adultery the new secret. And I pulled the yellow pages off the shelf, looked under counselors, called up total strangers, and walked in. And for the first time in my life, I said to somebody, can you help me? And I hit the bottom. And you know that somebody's hit the bottom when they stop pointing fingers at other people. They stop trying to blame shift. They own their stuff. They tell all their secrets. And I mean, Kim was furious for the first 2 years, and then it took her and I 11 years to heal. And that 11 years went from January 4th, 94, when I got the phone call where she had found out, to the end of 2004. 11 years of dismantling and rebuilding and doing the hard work. And it was hard work. It was terribly hard work. But that's where I started learning how to be present, because I didn't have enough energy to be more than present. There was too much going on. You know, for example, the first night that Kim and I have, well, it wasn't a conversation. It was a monologue from her, right? For about 4 hours. And I mean, she just ripped into me, because I had totally blindsided her. She just had no idea whatsoever. And at the end of those 4 hours, I said, look, if we're going to do this, I have to tell you every secret I have. She didn't know about my history. She didn't know about my past. She didn't know about anything. And naively, she said, bring it on. And it took me 4 days to tell her everything she didn't know. And she wanted to know details about everything, and I told her everything. But the first night, the first person that I had to tell was her dad, who lived with us.
Oh my gosh.
Who is a gentle, beautiful soul. And he lived with us for 17 years, but he's the first person that I had to tell. And my dad was an aggressive disciplinarian, abusive. And so I know I have survival skills that can deal with things like fury and fists, right? I don't have any skills to protect myself from kindness, you know, or goodness, but I watched my words break a man's heart.
Oh, you're making me cry.
Oh my gosh, it was awful. And then I needed to tell her family, and then I needed to tell my family, and then the community knew about it. And like I said, we never made this. I was done. We are as sick as the secrets we keep. And I knew that I had to find a way to change. And so that's why I pulled the yellow pages off the shelf, you know, back in the day, and just started with the A's under counselors, and got to agape, which is the Greek word for love, which is God is agape. It means other-centered, self-giving, self-sacrificial love. And if there's anybody in the world at that moment who needed a sense of that kind of love, it was me. And so I walk into this therapeutic environment, and you know, because I grew up in a world where therapy was almost, you know, witchcraft. And I mean, that's how holiness movement we were. But I knew I needed help. And so I met with a man who ran the clinic, and he said, I think I got the guy for you. He said, you can decide. And he introduces me to Scott Mitchell, who became my therapist. And so I'm sitting there talking to Scott, and he's a few years older than me. And you got to understand, I pulled this guy out of the yellow pages, yeah? And I'm now sitting in a city of 1 million plus people. And I'm sitting in front of him. And at first, you know, he tells me as we get to know each other that he's born Canadian. He was born in the province next to me. He went to school in the province next to me. All these connections. He had anyway. So I'm sitting in front of him, and I tell him what's going on. And I say to him, right now, Scott, I don't need anybody to ask me how I'm feeling about this. I just need to know, can you get me from A to Z? And he said, yeah, I can. It'll take me 1.5 years. I said, I'm in. He laughs. He goes, Paul, everybody who sits where you are right now, they always say they're in. But after a couple months, they feel better about themselves. They feel a little bit more in control again. And they usually bail out right before the really hard stuff. I said, look, I'm not leaving until you tell me I'm done. when you hit the bottom, you're not smarter than anybody anymore. It's not, your facade is gone. And now you're just trying to figure out what's actually real, what's not a survival mechanism. And so we started working, and every day I would meet with him. I'd tell Kim on my way to work, my own work, what Scott and I had been working on. And every day she had the same response. Yeah, right, whatever.
Oh, wow.
I mean, and that was okay. Because I knew at that point that I couldn't fix anybody, let alone I couldn't even fix myself. The idea that you can fix somebody is just sheer arrogance, usually covered by some kind of shame. Arrogance is often a mask for shame. But I'd hit the bottom, so it's like, yeah, she has every right to be furious. And here's something really significant. There's a big difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, and I think a lot of people misunderstand the distinction. Forgiveness is for the sake of the victim, and reconciliation is for the sake of the perpetrator. Forgiveness is so that the victim can be freed from what somebody did or some event that they experienced. Otherwise, if you carry around unforgiveness, it's like carrying a corpse around on your back and poisoning every relationship you have, and you're in bondage to it. Sadly, some of us, we create out of our hurt and trauma, we create a victim identity.
Yeah.
And then we can't forgive because we don't know who we are apart from that loss. And yes, people are victims, no doubt about it. I was. But forgiveness allows you to become free from that identity that will keep you in bondage. And so it's really for the sake of the perpetrator. There's this great little conversation between the disciples and Jesus, and Peter's right at the middle of it, who's kind of a hard ass. And Peter is like, he's like, so how many times do I have to forgive? Like 7? Now, what's really interesting about this is that he says 7. And Jesus' response is, no, 70 times 7. And that goes back to Genesis. I don't know if people realize that, but in Genesis, Cain's great grandson was a man who was a horrible human being. I mean, and his name was Lamech, and he's famous for his sword song. And in his sword song, he says this: if Cain will be avenged 7 times, I will be avenged 70 times 7. So when Peter says, how many times do I have to forgive? Because he wants vengeance, but he's got to do his religious duty to forgive X amount of times before he can finally take out his vengeance fantasies. Yeah? And he says, do I have to forgive like 7 times? And Jesus goes, no, 70 times 7. So he absolutely reverses Lamech's statement, and which is an infinite kind of number, right? 70 times 7 in that as a symbol. And Peter goes, well, that's impossible. And Jesus says, Peter, if you have faith, trust, if you have a sense of reality, the size of a mustard seed, which is a seed so small you can almost not see it, you can say to the mountain of unforgiveness, be picked up and thrown into the sea, and it will be. In other words, he's saying, you have enough personal agency to forgive. You can do that. And a lot of us, it's like, well, if I give up, if I actually forgive someone, then I have to give up my vengeance fantasy. Mm-hmm. And that's what empowers a lot of people, is the vengeance fantasy. And so, and Jesus is like, no, I came to free you, not to put you into bondage. It's vengeance and it's unforgiveness that is keeping you locked up. So forgiveness is for the sake of the victim. It's so that the victim can finally be free. Reconciliation is an arduous, agonizing journey for the sake of the perpetrator. And it involves a number of different things. Because here's the deal. You can forgive someone and never trust them again. because a lot of people confuse reconciliation and forgiveness. They think that when they forgive someone, they're supposed to like them now, or they're supposed to trust them now as evidence. And all that does is recycle cycles of abuse, right? And it's, no, you need to have good boundaries. If a person's not trustworthy, you can forgive them for what they did so that you can be free, but you don't have to ever trust them again. Now, reconciliation is the rebuilding of trust. It's the journey to rebuild trust, and it's for the sake of the perpetrator. And the perpetrator has absolutely no right to put a timetable on it, or even that it happens. And if it happens, it's an absolute miracle. And it involves confession, which is just telling the truth. That's all confession is you just tell the truth, right? It involves asking for forgiveness, not apologizing. Apologizing, when you apologize, you usually keep the power.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you that I'm sorry for what? That you got caught,
Mm-hmm.
But you're keeping the power. If I say, hey,
will you forgive me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes.
Then the power exchanges to the person who's been hurt, right?
That's good.
And so it's like, no, you have to ask for forgiveness, and then you have to be open to the person going like, so what do you think that you're asking me to forgive? What do you think you actually did?
Right.
And you have to be open to, I can't right now. I am so hurt, or I'm so devastated. And it's like, so the perpetrator doesn't have a right to put timetables or expectations on the process. And so telling the truth, asking for, owning it, owning all of it. And then here's the last piece. This is the repentance piece, which doesn't mean to feel bad. It means to change over time. Change over time. So it took Kim and I 11 years to reconcile. She forgave me within the first couple of years, but it took us 11 years to reconcile. And after I wrote The Shack, and after I wrote Eve, actually, I was doing a interview with Maria Shriver, who was married to Arnold Schwarzenegger, governor of California. And so she loved the book Eve, so we went for a walk after about a 45-minute interview that turned out to be 4 to 6 minutes on Good Morning America or whatever it was. And but we went for a walk, and at one point she turns to me and she says, "Does Kim trust you?"
Wow.
And I said, "Absolutely." And she has every reason to.
Wow.
And
I got chills.
And she said, "How did you get there?" And I said, "I got there because I owned what I did. I told the truth. All my secrets came out. After the first 4 days, at the end of those 4 days of telling Kim all my secrets, she said to me, "I will never believe another word that comes out of your mouth the rest of your life."
Wow.
And she was serious. So I thought, okay, this is the way my life's going to be. I'm going to go to work. But part of owning it is to also own the situation. I didn't run from it, but if she had decided it was over, it was over. And if I'd have gone, some of this is your crap too. If I'd have done that little deflection thing, it'd have been over. It'd have been over too, right? And so I thought, she is never going to believe anything that actually changes. And so I didn't do the work to change her. I didn't do the work to fix my marriage. Whatever the marriage was going to be, it wasn't going to be what it was, because I blew up what it was. And so 11 years, end of 2004, 2005 flips over. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I'm like one of the healthiest people I know. Seriously. I mean, no addictions. And I'm not talking about just the ugly ones and obvious ones like porn addiction, which owned me for so much of my life. I'm also talking about the addiction of doing something great for God or doing something great for humanity. Those kinds of gold-chained addictions that will drive you into the ground just as quick as anything else. And so no addictions, no secrets. And for the first time in my life, it felt like I was a child. I'd never been a child. I've always been working against trauma of some sort. And now I'm a child, and I'm the same person in every situation. Like, how does that even happen? You know, I'd been a different person depending on the audience. That's how my life had been. And now I'm the same person, whether I'm in a hotel room by myself or I'm with my friends or with strangers or with kids or whatever. I'm the same person. And then joy was a constant companion. Like, joy had never really spent the night. And now joy is a constant companion. And what I discovered is that I had learned over those 11 years to stay present, how to stay present, because in the present is fullness of joy. Mm-hmm. You know, fear always drives you away from the present. Fear drives you into some imagination about some great conspiracy thing that's going on. You know, that's all fear-driven stuff. And you can tell when fear is behind something because people will self-promote and self-protect, and they don't know how to stay present. They're always in some imagination of some catastrophe. I mean, we do this all the time, right? Human beings, we breathe future tripping. I mean, it's just like what we do because we don't know how to trust. And a lot of us who've been hurt, there's reasons we don't know how to trust. But in my relationship with divine love, with God, with Jesus, I have someone I can trust who doesn't leave. Mm-hmm. Right? And so that changed everything. And it was that year, the 12th year, so 11 years up to the end of 2004, 2005 is a year I feel healthy. And it's the year that I finally feel healthy enough to do this thing Kim has been asking me to do for 4 years. Kim, she kept saying for about 4 years, she'd say, like, so Paul, someday as a gift for our kids, would you write something that puts in one place how you think? Because you think outside the box. Now, later she told me she was thinking that I'd write 4 to 6 pages. That's what she was thinking. But I had nothing to give my kids that year, 2005, which is the year I turned 50. So all of these things are kind of 50, year of Jubilee, like fresh starts, you know. And on the train to one of my 3 jobs, I wrote most of a story that I got done by Christmas and made 15 copies at Office Depot with never an intention to become a published author. But those 15 copies did everything I ever wanted that book to do. And it's The Shack. And so I gave it to our 6 kids, and Kim and I kept a copy. And then the extras I gave to my friends at Christmas 2005. And I went back to work. And then my friends started giving it away, and that started this whole crazy chain reaction. But 2 things are really critical in all this. One is 15 copies did do everything I wanted that book to do. Everything else is just like
extra.
Oh my gosh. It's God's great sense of humor. And because I'm really an ordinary person who comes from a very broken history. And the second thing, and I think this is really significant, is that I didn't write the book in order to become anything. Mm-hmm. Everything that mattered to me was already in place by the time I wrote that book. So identity, worth, value, significance, security, meaning, purpose, destiny, community, love, all in place. Book didn't give me any of that. What the book did is gave us an invitation to walk on the holy ground of other people's story. Every human being's a story. And that story is holy ground. Because that's where you see the burning bush, right? You see the love of God without violation burning away everything that is not of love's kind. You know, this is a God who is a fiery fury because this God is opposed to that which harms the ones that God loves. And it's not, that fury is not against us, it's for us. Yes. And it's the same fury that any parent or grandparent feels when a child is in danger or is suffering an illness even, you know, and you just want to destroy that which harms the one you love. And that's a long bird's eye view of of where I am. So I'm 65 now. I wrote the book when I was 50, when I turned 50. And Kim and I are the best we've ever been. And even this season, of lockdown and quarantine and all that kind of stuff, as difficult as so many aspects of it are, there have been golden threads that have been woven throughout this, if you have eyes to see. I mean, part of it is that we're in a huge time of exposure. And that's a good thing, because the unexposed is the unhealed. You are as sick as the secrets you keep, and I keep, right?
The shack again, going back to this.
To that metaphor, yeah. So now, I live in the grace of one day. That's my work. I think the work for every human being is the fight to stay present. I think that's the work. Everything else flows from presence. I was with a group of people in Eastern Oregon a year ago, and I do Q&R, questions and response. It's the Canadian version of Q&A. It's that the Canadians know we don't have all the answers, so we do Q&R and questions and responses. And I love that, because you never know what somebody's going to ask. And I love the impromptu nature of all that. And this guy says, so there's this Irish proverb I'd like you to comment about. It goes like this: when you die, the only thing that will have mattered is if you had impact. What do you think about that? And out of my mouth, before I even thought, came words that I had to go like, I got to write that down. It's so good, right? Because that happens sometimes, and it's always surprising. Makes you look really smart, but it's like totally the Holy Spirit. And I said, I've never heard a child say anything like that. I guess you have to become an adult to say something like that. Children assume presence is impact. Mm. Yeah. And as soon as I said that, I went, that's a mic drop line. Children, as long as they're not trying to survive trauma.
Yeah.
Children that are healthy, they assume presence is impact. They're not coming here with a plan to try to impress Gramps or Grandma, and they're like, I'm here. The whole world is here right now, right this moment. This is it. And presence is impact. And a lot of us during this time, we've been forced to realize how much we've been running from presence.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Because they're being stuck at home, I think, in the quiet, not going to work, being in the family and just looking at the same walls and what have you, that people are making choices. They're either escaping with Netflix and alcohol and drugs and whatever to keep that lack of presence, or they're going inward and they're, and maybe they don't have a job coming out of it. So they're like, what do I really love doing? And it's like, I've heard so many people who are changing careers and doing the thing they've always wanted to do, and, really tapping into who they are and their purpose on the planet. And Robert Tennyson Stevens is a dear friend of mine, and he always says the present is present. Like, it's the gift present.
Absolutely.
And one thing I'm just going to say real quick, and I want to give you so much time, but I have recently been working with a couple that do scalar waves, and scalar waves can be used for healing. They can be used for mind control. They can good things and bad things. But one thing I've never heard until just recently is they can use scalar waves to measure the biofield. And this couple has measured different categories of thousands of people, and they can actually measure on a scale from 1 to 1,000 where people are with their integrity, their relationship to money, their creativity, their connection with God, their connection with purpose, their presence, and so 700 to 1,000 is the illumination number. Like, if you're in that scale, then you are above and beyond. And what they've said over and over is they will look, and if someone is present and has got good numbers for being present, then the other numbers just seem to automatically be high.
That's amazing.
Creativity, high. Relationships with people, high. Relationship with money, high. Relationship with God, high. Like, so, but presence, if any of the other ones might be really, really high and presence is low, then like all these other ones are lacking in number. So
that
it's
totally makes sense to me.
And joy and presence. You mentioned that earlier.
Joy is always present. See, it was never presence that left. It was me that left presence, right? Joy is a constant companion. And it's, if you don't have joy in your life, it's because you're not present.
Yes.
And what drives us from presence more than fear? You
yeah.
know?
And like you said, I call it time travel, but
I call it future tripping.
You called, I think it's cute that we have a similar mindset, but it's either thinking about the past, which is time travel, or thinking about the future is what causes stress, because you're thinking about what you're thinking about, and A, B, C, D, all the things of this happens. And that's where we get into beta. That's where we get into fight or flight. That's when it changes the biofield. That's when, if the biofield changes, you start collecting more situations that will give you more of that.
Yeah.
So the more we can remember, and I like that word remember, because means to do again. Member as one with source, fully God in every cell. That when we can do that. Now, I'm not going to sit here. I will tell you that is probably my biggest challenge. And I just turned 50, and that, my number for that wasn't so great. And so this has been something that I'm recommitting to. It just, because my very, very best mentors in life, including you, who I haven't had a lot of physical time with you, but you've been someone that I've really, really looked up to, and someone who's been very impacting on who I am. And that's why I thought about you, because I had that test and I was like, I got to reconnect with him. Sweet. But I know that this is it's not about connecting with everyone else who's got the connection, but it's about going back to remembering my connection with God.
Absolutely.
And we all have that opportunity, no matter if you're 50 or 5, but we forgot to play, I think.
Totally. You can't play unless you're present.
I really believe that one of the big key formulas for me is just coloring and laughing and getting out Play-Doh, this guy said last week, and just sitting on the floor and being creative in some way, drawing or running or skipping or just playing for no reason.
Yeah.
But anyway, definitely keep going with what you're saying.
Well, I have a theme for 2020, and it was so funny. In 2019, people would say, "What do you think about 2020?" Because I said, I think 2020 is going to be the year of hindsight. It was a joke, right? Because hindsight is always 2020, and
wow.
But who knew, right? Who knew what a year of hindsight this would be? But at the beginning of the year, I usually get a word for the year inside my conversation with God, but I got a phrase that was different, and also I got a verse from the New Testament, which was also different. I grew up in a very rigid fundamentalist kind of environment, and I think Trinity has this conversation about me, and has had for a number of years. It's like, so do you think we should give Paul a verse for this year? Nah, he gets too triggered. Which means I've grown a lot, because I got a verse for this year, which is an incredible verse. But the phrase for the year is trust the ripples.
Wow.
Trust the ripples. And that has become so significant for me, because it It's like, don't make your decisions based on perceived outcomes. Just participate, be part of the pebble that gets thrown into the pond, and then trust the ripples. Let the ripples go out. Don't try to control them. Don't try to manage them. Trust the ripples. And so that's been really significant. The verse comes from the book in the New Testament, the letter to the Hebrews, which is the Jews that have been scattered all over the world. And in this letter, in chapter 3, verse 13, it says this: encourage, which means to add heart, because cura in the Latin and the French is the heart, right? So enlarge the heart of one another.
Wow.
As long as it's about today.
Whoa.
So that you are not swept away by the deceitfulness of brokenness. That's a great verse, right?
Okay, what is that?
Hebrews 3:13. Encourage one another as long as it's about today. And in the Greek, today is emphatic. It has a particular structure. And in the version that I happen to be looking at, which was New American Standard, today is all in caps. And and it's like, no, this is about today. Everything about fear drives you out of today. And that's my future tripping, and creating the movies in our minds of all the things that are going to go wrong, right? And I find almost every conversation with someone who is in trauma and pain, that's a big issue. They don't know how to be present. I just yesterday, day before yesterday, had a conversation with a dear young man who is a beautiful human being, is involved in performance art, and married to, they're really good friends of ours, and they have a wonderful family of small children and all that. And COVID has put him into a situation where all of a sudden everything's dried up, and now he's scrambling to try to figure out what his identity is. And so, I said to him, so what's the single most powerful emotion you're feeling right now? And when we got behind just the surface stuff, like not having a job and that kind of stuff, it was fear. Fear was it. And so I said, okay, well, every human being has inside of them a meeting place where they can meet with divine love. It's built in by virtue of being made in the image of God, right? And I said, so you have a safe place inside of you where you can meet with love. What does that place look like? And he said, I used to have a place like that. I haven't for a long time. And he said, it used to be sitting on a surfboard out in the water. And he said, and I have another one, which is in a studio, because that's where he works. And I said, well, if you had to pick one of the two places to meet with God, which one would you pick? And he goes, the studio. I said, okay, well, let's do that. Let's go to the studio. I want you to go to the studio. And to make this short, he's in the studio sitting in a chair, and people go like, well, this is just your imagination. Where do you think God lives? He lives inside of you. He lives inside of your imagination and your emotions. God speaks to you in all kinds of different ways. Yeah. And Jesus walks in, and he kind of laughs, because Jesus kind of looks like the movie kind of Jesus, and the
movie kind of Jesus.
And I say, so look in his eyes. What do you see? What are you reading in the eyes? And does he say anything? No. And then he says, well, what does your fear look like? And he said, it looks like a ball and chain. Where does it sit in your body? It sits in my head, right? Well, are you able to pick up that ball and chain and give it to Jesus? He said, yeah. Well, tell me what Jesus does with it. Well, Jesus just threw it over his shoulder, not like to carry it, just threw it over his shoulder. And asked Jesus, how do you want me to look at this? And Jesus said, come. And he put out his hand, and they walked out of the studio and up onto this hill, and then down into this ravine where there was a creek. And Jesus is like, right there. And he goes, how do you want me to understand this creek? And the two words were ever flowing present.
Wow.
Right? Those were the two words that Jesus told him, ever flowing present. And it was such an affront, because, you know, the imagery of suicide was being built up out of fear. Like, and fear is always a certain group of whispers. I'm alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is why in Scripture, every time God shows up, the first thing he says is, fear not. The second thing is, I'm with you, right? I'm alone. There's not enough. There's not enough. So scarcity is the underlying driver for fear, right? There's not enough. I'm not going to have enough to feed my kids. I'm not going to have enough. That's why we're all in competition with each other, because there's not enough, you know.
An
So
illusion.
yeah, it's completely an illusion. Fear is an illusion. It's all built on illusion. So this is where in Paul the Apostle writes, he says, take captive every empty imagination that raises itself up against the knowing of love. Right? So you're alone. Nobody else has your back. There's not enough, and you're going to be exposed that you don't have what it takes. Those are four fundamental drivers for fear, right? And all of them will push you out of the present. And so, I mean, we do this so regularly that we've even baptized fear and named it things like responsibility, right? And in order to or we think, well, at least I'm worrying, I'm doing something, yeah. And all of it drives you out of the present. So we have these imaginations, right? I mean, down to, well, I'm going to say this to this person, and we got the movie playing in our mind,
right?
I say this to this person, then they say this back to me, and I get mad, and they get mad, and we're never going to have a relationship. So why even tell them anything?
Right.
I mean, and it's like the next time we see them, we've got this distance between us because I have this imagination.
Made up thing, yeah.
Yep. Or, you know, we take the cue, somebody walks in a room and they glances at our direction, but they don't, and we read on their faces the fear that we have about how they see us, right? And it's just like, what a complete waste of time.
Well, and you going back to the fear not, there is 365 fear nots in the Bible, one for every freaking day.
Yep.
And also that scripture that you just brought up is literally my favorite scripture.
Sweet.
We demolish arguments
Yep.
and every pretension and or imagination, because to pretend means to tend to as if it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And we demolish arguments and every pretension or every image that doesn't line up with love. And and how do we do that? We take captive. So how do you take captive? You know, you have to be disciplined up here, which comes from disciple, and really be aware what you're thinking. Because if you start to make up those stories, which competition is an illusion, fear is an illusion, you know, all these things, if we have some predetermined idea of what someone thinks about us, which is just ego, really, fear, then we're setting ourselves up to image that, and we actually create it with the power of our mind.
Well, and you know yourself, your body doesn't know the difference.
Yeah, your limbic system can't tell if you're, you know, actually doing it or if it's just in your head, because your limbic system takes all images as real. So you have a chemical reaction. So your body goes into fight or flight or beta waves, you know, which changes your whole biofield. And guess what? The biofield is radiating out, and it also magnetizes. So if you live in fear and you have your mind fixed on fear, you're creating fear code, which magnetizes more situations to set yourself up for more fear situations. And because you'll be proving yourself right. Yeah. Basically, you're creating your own, you know,
false unreality.
Yes.
Yeah, you're creating your own unreality. And you know what? And there's a lot of it. So for example, during this pandemic, we've had, I think, 11 members of our extended family have tested positive.
Oh, wow. Right?
And 3 of them, we weren't sure were going to survive. I mean, it got really serious. And but as soon as you hear that kind of thing, you're immediately invited into future tripping. You're immediately invited into leaving the presence. I've got a really good friend who went to the doctor and was told there's something seriously wrong here. It could be MS, it could be, and they named 3 other major diseases. Well, that put her into a tailspin. And I didn't know about it. She lives in Michigan, and her and her family, or her husband calls me and says, Paul, would you talk to her? And I said, absolutely. What's going on? And he tells me. So I call her up, and we chit chat about our kids and stuff like that for a bit. And then she says, like, so why are you calling? And I said, well, I'm calling to help you plan your funeral.
Oh.
And she laughs. She goes, what? And then she goes, oh, Brian called you, didn't he? And I go, yeah, he loves you. I said, look, he told me that, that this is what you got diagnosed with, that possibly one of these things. And so I figured you were so deeply into future tripping that I would call you up and save you some time, and you and I together would plan your funeral. Like what kind of music you want, what you want somebody to say to your kids, And she just laughed. She went, oh my gosh.
That's awesome.
She said, you know what I've been doing the last 48 hours? Researching everything I can on MS. I mean, I've hardly gotten any sleep because I'm trying to because see, a lot of what we do, instead of staying present, we're going to run into something. So she's thinking knowledge will give her back the control she feels has left.
Wow.
And that the reality is we don't have control. I mean, you could be dead by tomorrow because some cell in your brain goes sideways, right? I mean, it's all, the only real world is the world that you are in this moment. This conversation that I'm having with you is the real world. This is where God lives in you and God lives in me. And this is where everything flows from, is presence. And in the present, there's fullness of joy. Why? Because it's not being all diverted by you're going to some imagination of some catastrophe. Because I mean, I've been in my imagination, I've been to my own funeral a whole bunch of times, and nobody cried, and it pissed me off. And I've, I find out, this job is no longer, they have to lay off, and I'm being laid off, and suddenly in my imagination, I'm under Burnside Bridge in a cardboard box. Nobody is there. I'm totally alone. I am gonna die, and nobody cares. So all of those basic fundamental lies have reemerged inside of fear. I'm alone. Nobody else has got my back. There's not enough, and I don't have what it takes, which is the shame piece that empowers elements of fear. And it's like, there is no possibility. So then we get corporately involved with fear, right? We come up with corporate, collective conspiracy theories. And you can always tell when some of these things are just, and it's not that there aren't conspiracies in the world, where there's money, there's people trying to do stuff. Who cares? That's not the point. And the point is that we suddenly spin out, and it no longer becomes about peace and joy and love and presence. It becomes about scrambling to get my peace before there isn't my peace left. And I'm talking about PIECE, not PEACE. And it's like, because there's not enough, and somebody's going to take away my part of it. And so we want to make sure those people aren't present to take away my part of what's due me, because there's not enough. And so the whole fear of financial insecurity and everything else is based on a lack mentality, a scarcity mentality. And you can tell, you can listen to people who are freaking out because they begin to self promote, and they begin to self protect. Everything is about, I've got to get my place secure, and and by the way, you need to buy things from me so that I feel like I've got a buffer against this impending doom situation. And it's like, there's no God in your life, no love in your life, there's no peace in your life. I mean, and you're scrambling. And it's like, I can so easily be exactly the same thing. I mean, I can create an enemy who is an impediment for me to not have control. Because that's what fear is. It's a response to not being in control. And your choice is one of two. Find a way to control, and future tripping is one of those imaginary ways to try to get a sense of control. Or trust. Those are your two choices. And trust is always present tense. Mm-hmm. You don't get grace today for something that doesn't exist. And empty imaginations don't exist.
Yes, and that word imagination is so powerful, because talking about the collective again, to image a nation, imagination, to image a nation. And when we're doing that on a collective, it actually can change the whole field of the earth. Like, it's measurable. Yeah. And I mean, they've done all kinds of things where the earth actually shifted with everyone's focus on OJ that day, or Diana, or, the wedding or the funeral or 9/11. I mean, this kind of stuff actually does change the literal earth collective frequency.
Yeah. But here's the good news.
We can do it on the opposite too.
Not just the opposite. Love is way more powerful than fear. It's love that has the power to cast fear out. The one who fears is not perfected in love. That means you just don't know how much you're loved yet. There is no fear in love. This is all 1 John, right? I'm quoting. And this is why when it said, well, the sins, the brokenness of someone will visit their family for X amount of generations, but goodness will go to 1,000. So it was like 5 or 6 or 4, depending on the passage, but about, the way you treat your children will spill out into their lives and their children, right? It can be stopped, but it takes actual participation. God won't heal you apart from your participation. This is not something God does to you, because personal agency is a requirement for love to even exist. And so God's not going to heal you apart from your participation. But love and light, I mean, think about this. Anything that is actual is real. So light is real. It has speed. It has particle and wave, right? Darkness doesn't have any of that. Mm-hmm. So, right? Truth has presence. It has power. It has substance.
Yes.
Lies don't. In fact, without truth, you can't have a lie. But you can have truth without a lie.
Oh, yeah.
But lies can't exist without a truth.
And it's measurable. Going back to data.
Sure.
They've measured people's physical bodies when someone is sitting there telling them lies over and over and over again, and you will drain out. Your frequency literally dispels. But the opposite is true. When you speak love or anything that's positively true, like, it doesn't even have to be positive. It could just be factually true. Then it actually builds up the strength of your physical body. It's tangible. You can feel it. If you pay attention, you can, like you said, you could tell where the undercurrent is literally of what people are saying and how they're saying it.
Yep. And you can say, you know what? I'm not going to participate in that kind of stuff. It's like, fear not is an invitation. Right. It's like, take captive every empty imagination. And imagination framed inside of love produces incredibly beautiful, wonderful, substantial things. Imagination framed inside fear just produces more violence, and the external violence that you're watching in the world it's really a manifestation of internal violence that's happening inside of people. And the grounds for that internal violence is fundamentally fear.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even going back to not just what we're watching, but the scriptures say, whatever you give ear to be careful, because it will be given unto you. So who are you listening to? Like you said, when someone calls and says whatever, I'm like, hey, call them direct, please. keep me out of it. I'm not, I do my best to kind of keep anything that's not going to serve the situation or myself or my physical body or my emotions.
Yeah.
And like check that at the door.
And here's the other good news. This is a simple way to live. To live in the present is how a child lives unless they're hurt, right? It's just, they don't have 5-year plans. They're not scrambling. They're not, they don't see color except as beauty. They see color as beauty. They don't see color as divisive. They don't have the inability to love on people who are different or older, or and so this is a simple way to live. To trust is a simple way to live. Fear is incredibly complex. And when people start getting very complicated in how they're looking at the world and all these things are going on and all these levels of this and levels of that and all that kind of stuff, I'm like, you know what? That's just too complicated for me. If this doesn't work for children, it's probably not that significant, So I like being a child.
Yes. Well, I know we're hitting that mark, but I do have one more question for you before we skedaddle today. And I also want to say security and trust go hand in hand. But one of my decrees is I am secure and I see cure everywhere I go. That's one of my favorite. I see cure is kind of a play on words. I see
Nice.
cure.
I got it.
Secure.
Yeah.
And also, so one question about the book and then the movie for those who, in the beginning, I honestly had a little bit of a hard time getting through it because the first couple chapters were just so.
They're rough.
Yeah.
They're not graphic. I never brutalized because I was writing this for my kids. My youngest was 12 at the time. So I wrote it with that in mind, but it's wrenching.
I put it down a few times and everyone kept encouraging me, just get through that part. And so that's, just for anyone who's never read it, listen to me and trust me, and don't trust me, trust yourself and go listen, watch the whole thing or read the whole thing. But the other thing is that you were kind of not groundbreaking, but when your wife, Kim, said thinking out the box, you really went out and probably got a little bit of some feedback on the fact that
I got a lot of feedback.
The fact that you made Jesus not look like the Jesus movie, like the Hollywood Jesus. You even had God be a woman and look like all these different parts, because he, she, it, source is all of those things. But explain a little bit on that, and just I would love for you to get. Did you get a lot of feedback?
I got plenty, especially from my own people. Modern evangelicals. Now they're my people, so be careful how you talk about them. But but they're very locked into certainty and theological certainty, and as a result, they can be quite unkind as human beings, and that's because of fear. Again, because they've been taught an additional layer of fear besides the normal ones that everybody else has. And that's a whole theological realm of fear that includes eternal conscious torment, hell, and a God who is God the Father, who is basically angry and all that. So I disrupted, not intentionally, because you have to remember that I made 15 copies at Office Depot and it did everything I wanted it to do. I didn't have any context that this would become this massive worldwide thing. And Papa God, as a large Black African American woman, was there day one when I started working on this. There was no question in my mind, and part of that is because I actually have a theological education, and right from verse 2 in Genesis, the Holy Spirit is introduced as in feminine language. Ruach's feminine, and almost all the verbs for God in the Hebrew scriptures are feminine.
It's true.
And even though the nouns are masculine, but you've got this mix. And here's a really important piece. imagery doesn't define God. If you think that imagery defines God, then you're now moving into idolatry. That is, you're focused on some image rather than on the source that empowers or is that it's speaking about. And so in Scripture, you have God as inanimate objects, like God is a rock, God is a strong tower, God is a shield. You have God as animals, like a lamb and a lion and an eagle, a mother eagle, and a mother hen who covers the chicks. You know, I told somebody, well, I guess I could have had Papa God come through the door as a big hen, but I just don't think it would have done the same thing, you know. And so you've got, I mean, there's this fantastic passage in Isaiah where God as Father has a womb in which he carries you. I mean, and the Latin words in that verse are vulva and utero.
Whoa.
Right? And
that's pretty specific.
Oh, it's very specific. And it's like, don't you understand that all of masculinity and all of femininity originate inside the Father, inside the Son, inside the Holy Spirit. And God is not a physical being. God is spirit. Yes. Jesus, who is God, right, fully joins us in our humanity so that we would, one, know what being human is like, and also know who God is. And that's why Jesus becomes such an incredible, and Trinity matters to me because that means that God has never been alone. And that's why aloneness becomes such the central lie of fear, right? And because if God has ever been alone, then God cannot by nature love, because it requires an other for love to exist. Right? And so the idea of three persons who make up the oneness of God absolutely tracks with me on so many different levels. So yeah, I got a lot of pushback from my
this
people.
is years ago. Yep. I'm seeing that people are starting to just now wake up to that. And I'm just like,
I know.
The El Shaddai, the fully breasted one. It's like, oh my goodness, that's God. It's still God.
Yeah. And yes, we have the masculine imagery, but it's like the whole, it's a spectrum of reality, not polarity here.
Yes.
You know, and so I love what happened as a result, but it, you know, like somebody said, in fact, he was the president of Denver Seminary. He wrote an article about the pushback that I had gotten. And he said in his article, he said, I don't care how religious you are. When you read where Papa comes out the door and picks Mackenzie up and swings him around, and when you read that, I don't care. He said, I don't care how legalistic or religious you are. Wasn't there something inside of you that wanted to be the one picked up and swung around inside that embrace of relentless affection? And I'm like, yeah, we're made for that. We are designed to be loved and live in love. And it's fear that drives us away from that presence in reality. Yeah.
Well, it definitely caused me to dig deeper in the real scriptures of Hebrew, Greek, whatever. And I was shocked to sit there and see that most of where I saw it was when God was mentioned, it was he, she, it, them, they. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't learn this in seminary.
Yeah, and you start in Genesis,
Bible school.
You just read Genesis 1 through 3 and it's all over the place.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so thank you for being with us. And
thanks for the honor.
Yeah, tell us how we can find you. I know you're on Facebook, your website,
there's this thing, the W.M. Paul Young thing. You know what? Notoriety and platform is a sort of a cross, and I'm one, I don't need it, and never have, but I'm grateful for the fact that I'm invited into conversations that I know the ripple effects will go out, and I trust the ripples. So the W.M. Paul Young thing just will connect you to Facebook or stuff that I've done or things like that, and who cares? You know, it's great if you want to dabble in a bit, but if you just YouTube Paul Young, you'll run into a bazillion things, as well as the British singer who wrote "Every Time You Go Away."
You take a piece of me with you.
Yeah, that's
awesome.
it. That's Paul Young.
Yes.
And, which is great.
Yes, and he has other books too. So please do check out his website, go to YouTube, all the things that he's doing, newsletters, make sure you're getting notifications and all that so you can keep up with what he's doing. And anyway, I just am forever grateful for us crossing paths years ago, and just really thankful that you gave us some time here for people to be reintroduced to you and to connect with you again.
Thank you. Well, you've come a long way, baby.
We are all hopefully coming a long
We are.
way.
I'm such an optimist about all this. I really am, because I really do think love is more powerful than fear. And I really do think that every human being is made in the image of that love and indwelt by love, whether they know it or not. And so there is an active work that is happening from inside every human being that connects to things that are good and right and beautiful and true and kind and, all of those things. And
good news, good report.
Yep,
yes,
for sure.
Think on these things, guys. Yes. And for all of you guys watching, thank you for being here. I really do hope that you guys will share this, because especially the presence, the forgiveness, and the reconciliation, the part for people to really dig in. I know that there's so many people who will really appreciate his story, his message, his testimony. And so please do share, tag, and make sure people, if there's anyone that you can think of that would benefit from this or resonate from this interview today, I hope you guys will do that. And I have other interviews coming up this week, so I hope you guys will stay tuned. I have Decoder Logan Jason on in about 20 minutes. I have Laura Eisenhower on tomorrow. I have Jason Q and Jason Westerfield on Thursday. But you can go to swiftfire.org and make sure that you get the newsletter, and you'll know what the schedule is and where to find me and all of those things. But go get his book, The Shack. Go get the other books. Watch the movie. The movie, oh my gosh, I love the character, the main character. He also played in Avatar.
He did.
And I mean, he's just I really like.
And he was in that the war movie, what's it called? That came out after. Actually, they released it right before, and it was produced by.
Is his name Sam?
Sam Worthington is his name.
Sam Worthington, yeah.
So yeah, he did a great job in that. It was the war movie that was. I just can't think of the name of it, but it's true story based true story.
Oh wow! Okay.
And it came out actually. The Shack got pushed off as a movie to release. They decided it was going to release in the fall, and they pushed it to the following. Actually, they picked March the 3rd, which was 3/3, which was kind of cool, and then so that they could release this movie, because they wanted this war movie to be in the run for the possible Oscars.
Okay.
And what's the famous Jesus movie that rocked the world?
With Mel Gibson?
Passion. Yes.
Passion
of the Christ, and Mel Gibson was the producer director of this war movie.
With Sam Worthington. I'll have to Google it.
Correct.
Yes.
It's a difficult movie, but it's brilliantly done, and it's quite redemptive, but it's rough in terms of
I don't think the movie had come out yet when I met you. I remember.
No, it hadn't.
When we first met, you were just talking about having to have all these. The printer was bringing you all these boxes to fill your entire garage because you were shipping everything out by yourself.
Well, I was stopping on the freeway, and people were handing me money, and I was giving them boxes.
I remember that.
Close to a drug dealer as I've ever been.
Oh my God, that's amazing! Awesome.
Yeah, it is. Well, blessings on you. Much love
sir.
to you and to all that are watching.
And tell Kim I said hello. And I cannot believe your youngest is freaking 27. That is just like what?
My oldest turned 40.
Oh, wow. Well,
this
have
year.
a wonderful week, a wonderful year, and let's
Enjoy
just say
today's
that.
grace.
Yes, sir. All right. Thank you for everything. Bye, you guys. We'll see you
Bye-bye.
guys later and talk soon. Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.